Welcome everyone. This is today's deep news analysis, calm, clear, and straight to the point. If you love real Nigerian stories, please subscribe and turn on your notification bell so you never miss important updates like this. Now listen carefully, because today's story is not normal. A former minister of justice, a powerful man, a man who once held the law in his hands, is now asking Nnamdi Kanu for forgiveness. Yes, the same Nnamdi Kanu. Let's break it down. Abubakar Malami was once one of the most powerful men in Nigeria. As Attorney General, he spoke for the law. He moved the system. At that time, his voice carried weight. When he spoke, institutions listened. When he acted, the state followed. He was not just a minister. He was the legal face of the Nigerian government. For many Nigerians, Malami represented authority. He was the man who explained government actions, the man who defended state decisions, the man who stood before the world and said, "This is the law, and this is what we will do." That position gave him power. Real power. The kind that can change lives, shape destinies, and leave lasting marks on history. One of the biggest moments of that power was his role in the case of Nnamdi Kanu. Nnamdi Kanu was not just another name. He was a symbol. To some, a freedom voice. To others, a threat to the state. But to everyone, he was a figure that mattered. When Kanu was taken from Kenya, many Nigerians were shocked. The method raised serious questions. The timing raised global attention. And the silence that followed raised fear. Behind the scenes, government officials spoke. Legal justifications were prepared. Official explanations were arranged. And Abubakar Malami stood at the center. He defended the process. He justified the action. He used the language of law to explain it. At that time, there was no apology. There was no doubt. There was no hesitation. The government was firm. And Malami was firm with them. For supporters of Nnamdi Kanu, that period felt dark. It felt heavy. It felt like the law was being used, not to protect, but to silence. For others, it felt like the state was showing strength. Either way, the balance of power was clear. One man was free, powerful, protected by office. The other man was detained, isolated, and facing the full force of the state. That is how power works when it speaks loud. Then came the court process. Day after day, week after week, the legal battle continued. Government lawyers stood strong. State institutions aligned. The system moved in one direction. And on November 20th, the final hammer dropped. Nnamdi Kanu was sentenced to life imprisonment. That sentence was not just legal. It was emotional. It sent shockwaves across Nigeria, and far beyond its borders. Soon after, he was moved to Sokoto prison. Far from his base. Far from familiar ground. Deep inside the Nigerian prison system. At that moment, many believed the story was over. The state had won. The system had spoken. From the outside, it looked final. It looked settled. It looked permanent. Life moved on. But history has a quiet habit of watching. Time records everything. It waits. It does not rush. Because power, no matter how loud it speaks, is never permanent. And that truth was waiting patiently for its turn to speak. Power has a strange habit. It makes people feel permanent. It creates comfort. It builds confidence. And sometimes, it creates silence around warning signs. After leaving office, Abubakar Malami was no longer the Attorney General. No official cars. No legal shield of the state. No daily briefings backed by federal power. But like many former leaders, he did not step away from ambition. Instead, he stepped into politics again. Malami joined the African Democratic Congress, ADC. Soon after, reports began to spread. He was preparing to run for governor of Kebbi State, a major state in Nigeria's northwest, a state where influence matters, a state where history and loyalty play strong roles. At first, it looked like a normal political move. Former officials often return this way. New party, new plan, new path to power. But this time, the ground beneath him was not stable. Because while politics was moving, another force was watching quietly. The Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, EFCC. Then the story broke. Abubakar Malami was arrested by the EFCC. Not for political rivalry, not for party defection, but for corruption and investigation linked to his time in office. This was not noise. This was not rumor alone. This was the same anti-graft system that has sent powerful people into long legal battles. For many Nigerians, the news landed heavy. A former Minister of Justice, now under investigation. A man who once spoke for the law, now answering questions from it. According to reports, Malami remains in custody as investigations continue, and the charges he faces carry serious weight. If found guilty, this is not a short issue. This is not a fine and release story. This is years of possible imprisonment. At this point, the tone of the story changed completely. The man who once stood tall before microphones was now silent. The man who once defended the state was now defending himself. And this is where the story becomes deeply human. Because when power falls away, reality becomes very clear. Reports began to emerge that Abubakar Malami had asked Nnamdi Kanu for forgiveness. Let that sink in. The same Nnamdi Kanu, who was taken from Kenya. The same man now serving life imprisonment. The same man in Sokoto prison. The roles had shifted. This was no longer politics. This was conscience. This was fear. This was reflection. From a realistic point of view, this request makes sense. When people face long prison terms, they begin to look backward. They review their past actions. They remember decisions made with confidence, but without mercy. Power gives courage, but the loss of power brings memory. Malami now stands at a point where the law he once used can shape his own future. The EFCC process is slow. It is heavy. It is mentally draining. Days in custody feel long. Uncertainty grows, and the future becomes unclear. At that point, forgiveness stops being a moral topic. It becomes a personal need. Nigerians are divided over this development. Some see it as karma. Some see it as irony. Others see it as a lesson. But very few see it as coincidence. Because Nigeria has seen this pattern before. Former power holders meeting the same system they once controlled. This is not celebration. It is reality. The political ambition for Kebbi State has now been overshadowed by legal survival. The ADC move, the governorship dream, the future plans, all paused. And now, the focus is simple. Freedom, justice, mercy. As this chapter closes, one thing is clear. The table has turned. Not by noise, not by protest, but by time. And time does not forget. This story is no longer about one man. It is about a system. It is about choices. And it is about consequences. Nigeria has seen power rise and fall many times. We have watched leaders come in strong, speak with confidence, and act like tomorrow does not exist. But tomorrow always comes. What makes this moment heavy is not just that Abubakar Malami is in trouble. It is where he is standing now. He is standing inside the same legal reality that many Nigerians have stood in before him. A place with no titles, no immunity, no special language, only facts, only files, only time. This is why his reported request for forgiveness from Nnamdi Kanu has struck such a deep nerve. Because forgiveness is not asked for when things are easy. It is asked for when fear enters the room. When regret becomes loud. When silence forces memory to speak. From a realistic point of view, this moment makes sense. When people are powerful, they think in strategy. They think in advantage. They think in control. But when people are powerless, they think in truth. They remember who they hurt. They remember decisions they rushed. They remember voices they ignored. Nnamdi Kanu's name did not disappear after sentencing. It stayed alive in conversations, in homes, in debates, in anger, in hope. For many Nigerians, his case became a symbol of injustice to some, a symbol of law enforcement to others. But symbols do not fade easily. Now imagine sitting alone, facing years that are uncertain, knowing the system you once trusted is now judging you. At that point, politics disappears, pride disappears, excuses disappear, only accountability remains. This is why this story feels heavy across the country. Not because Nigerians are celebrating, but because Nigerians understand. They understand that power is temporary. They understand that actions echo. They understand that today's decision can become tomorrow's prison. For young Nigerians watching, this is a lesson, not in fear, but in responsibility, because every choice made in power writes a future sentence somewhere. This moment also forces Nigeria to ask hard questions. Is justice truly blind? Or does it only see when power changes hands? Is the system fair? Or does fairness arrive late? These questions are uncomfortable, but they are necessary, because a country grows, not by hiding its contradictions, but by facing them. Abubakar Malami's journey, from power to prosecution, is not unique, but the timing, the history, and the people involved make it unforgettable. And then there is Nnamdi Kanu, a man already serving life imprisonment, a man far from freedom, a man whose name still shakes the system. The idea that forgiveness may be requested from someone in such a position changes the meaning of strength. It reminds us that strength is not always who holds the keys, but who holds peace of mind. Forgiveness does not erase consequences. It does not cancel the law, but it speaks to the human side of justice. As Nigerians, we must watch this story carefully, not with noise, not with insults, but with understanding. Because today it is Malami. Yesterday it was another name. Tomorrow, it could be someone else. The system must be stronger than individuals. Justice must be deeper than politics. And leadership must be guided by restraint. This is the real lesson. Not revenge. Not mockery. But awareness. If power teaches anything, it should teach humility. If leadership means anything, it should mean accountability. As this story continues, Nigeria is watching. Watching the EFCC. Watching the courts. Watching the outcome. Because the ending of this story will say a lot about where the country is going. And one truth remains clear. Power can protect you for a while, but time will always ask questions. And when it does, there is no office strong enough to silence it. This story should not end with noise. It should end with reflection. Because what Nigerians are witnessing is not drama. It is reality playing out in slow motion. A former minister of justice, a man who once stood above many laws, now standing inside the same legal process that millions of ordinary Nigerians face every day. This is not about hate. This is not about celebration. This is about understanding how power works, and how quickly it can disappear. When Abubakar Malami held office, his decisions shaped lives. Some people felt protected. Others felt crushed. Today, the system he once defended is asking him questions. That alone should make every Nigerian pause. Because power does not ask for permission before it leaves. It does not announce its exit. It simply goes. And when it goes, all that remains are records, actions, and consequences. The reported request for forgiveness from Nnamdi Kanu adds a human layer to this story. It reminds us that beyond politics, beyond parties, beyond ambition, there are human beings who must live with their choices. Forgiveness does not change the law, but it changes the heart. And sometimes, that is where real judgment begins. As Nigerians, we must learn from this moment. Leaders must learn that authority is temporary. Officials must learn that decisions follow them. And citizens must learn to watch power carefully. Because silence today can become regret tomorrow. This story is still unfolding. Investigations are ongoing. The courts will speak. But no matter the outcome, one lesson is already clear. Justice must be stronger than influence. Law must be higher than office. And leadership must answer to history. Nigeria does not need perfect people. Nigeria needs responsible power. If this story has taught anything, it is that time is the final judge. And time never forgets. Thank you for watching. Stay informed. Stay thoughtful. And never forget that power answers to tomorrow.